Good morning. I'm Lynn Allen Sion. I'm the president and CEO of the Orange County Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome everybody here today. We have a really important masterclass for you with Janet Giannetta from Visions HR, who's also one of our board members, and Bob Ranieri from Rose and Kiernan, who's one of our sponsors. And before I turn it over to Rob, I just want to, as always, thank our corporate partners here at the Chamber. So our platinum partners are Cornerstone Family Healthcare, Drake Loeb, Legoland New York Resort, Woodbury Common, New York, New Jersey Port Authority, New York Stewart International Airport. Our gold sponsors are Access Supports for Living, Central Hudson Gas and Electric, Community Products, DocuWare, Empire State Bank, Hudson Valley Credit Union, Orange Bank and Trust, Orange and Rockland Utilities, Orange Regional Medical Center, Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine. Our President's Circle is Interact Marketing and SDA Events, and Acquisitions Marketing. So I want to thank all of our corporate partners. Before I turn it over to Rob, I do want to just let everybody know there's still a lot going on in the state. The PPP loans are still available. The SBA loans have kind of stopped for the moment because of the financial appropriations that they still have to make. If anybody needs any help with any of that, please email me. Nicole will be popping up my email. It's lynnc@orangeny.com. And you can email me. I'll be more than happy to help you with that. Also with unemployment, we've been working a lot with our sole proprietors to help them be able to access the unemployment that's out there. Two events I do want to make sure that you know that today, Meet the Members at 2 p.m. will be Crunch Fitness. And tomorrow we have Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, who will be here from 3:30 to 4:30 on our Facebook Live. We'll be speaking with him about some of the things that are happening at the federal level regarding the coronavirus and testing and everything else. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you, Rob. And again, thank you for sponsoring today's very important masterclass.
Oh, great. Lynn, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to sponsor today. I'll be very brief. We at Rose and Kiernan have been open for business during this entire pandemic, and we've been mostly helping our clients with all of their needs, helping them with secure the loan, helping a lot of our not-for-profits maneuver through the trials and tribulations the last couple of months. So if there's any help that you need moving forward with any of your insurance products, whether it be property casualty, employee benefits, or personal lines, we're a phone call away. Our office is open in Fishkill. So any of the Orange County Chamber members, please, certainly give us a call with any questions or concerns. We've become educators, and we are becoming as well versed as possible on a day-to-day basis, depending on what is happening out of Albany and Washington. And we do have some really good content that we're sending to our clients and a lot of our friends in the community. So, certainly feel free to give us a call, contact the Chamber. We can certainly forward your information as well. We'll be sponsoring more events in the future. We look forward to helping any way possible in the community. If you need help, if you are a not-for-profit and you're looking for any support, please certainly give us a call too. We are helping the community as best we can. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Janet Giannetta, who's going to do an outstanding presentation today. Lynn, Nicole, thank you. Look forward to doing this again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you. We appreciate your partnership and your membership with the Chamber. Great. Very important in your great business in the Valley. So we're also open here at the Chamber, and Janet, you're going to speak about really everything. You are our HR specialist, really, for so many things. You're my go-to person. And I know there's a lot going on with COVID right now. There's a lot of, there's always been a lot of intricacies with HR. And now there just seems to be a lot more and a lot more layers. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And as you discussed, if anybody has questions, feel free to write them down in the live comments, and Janet will be here to answer it. So Janet, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. So today we do have a PowerPoint presentation. I am going to go through not necessarily what the state is putting out there in New York Forward. There's a lot of guidelines from the CDC and from New York Forward and a lot of other federal and state partners. This is going to focus more on the HR side of things and bringing people back to work as we're going forward with the reopening phases. So with the agenda, we're going to cover 10 different areas, actually 11 different areas, covering all the different aspects of HR and things that you need to worry about when bringing employees back to work. So let's focus first on the recall procedures, because I think that's really where it starts. I hope that if it was necessary for you to furlough or lay off employees, that you actually had a written plan, or that you documented why you recalled, why you furloughed or why you laid off, who, and the reason behind it, because it's going to be very important to support your decisions. And looking back, in the event that you have to defend it or support it, why did you furlough? Why did you lay off? I want to take one quick second to discuss furlough versus layoff. Typically a furlough is a temporary layoff where the employee is not terminated. They're actually an inactive, sometimes with benefits, sometimes without benefits, versus a laid off employee, which tends to be terminated. And hopefully you followed your termination procedures when it came to that. So now it's time to bring people back or get back up to speed. So how do you want to do that? One way is to phase them in. Almost you could look at the opposite way that you laid off or you furloughed people and do it in that manner. Many people are bringing back bit by bit instead of their whole workforce. And that could be for a variety of reasons. One, just because there's not the work available. Two, because they haven't been allowed to yet. Maybe they're not essential. Or three, there are issues with the PPP. If you've gotten a loan with regard to forgiveness, you do have a period of time where you have to get your head count back up to where it was, or at least your FTEs. So there are phasing in. Another area with regard to that is that you want to have the same type of written plan that you had for your layoffs. So you have to have a communication plan. Make a plan. Who are you bringing back? Why are you bringing them back? When are you bringing them back? Are you bringing them back at the same shift, schedule, assignment? All of those are necessary and should have a business justification that you can show if you needed to. Next thing is to make sure that you have a recall letter. And I can send, I believe it's sent, or we can get you samples of a recall letter. But basically, it should say something to the effect that we're recalling you when they have to notify you if they are or not coming back. And that's the very important thing. And we're going to discuss this with regard to people who choose not to come back. And in the event that they do not, there's certain steps you want to take. So the recall letter is going to say when you're coming back, when you're resuming operations, and any instructions with regard to paperwork needed or any new orientation that they may need to do with it. But it's important that you have a recall letter. There's also, again, a lot of state guidelines. In New York, for example, if you are returning business, you have to have a written affirmation. And that gets sent to the approving regional bodies. You also have to have a work safety plan. And the state has made these safety plans according to industry. So every phase that goes through, you're going to see a work safety plan specific to an industry. And if your industry is not there, there's a general one. But what you have to understand is that this work safety plan has to be communicated to employees and posted where employees can see it. So it's not just that you have to have it, and you don't have to send it to the state, but you do have to have it available if they walk in and audit you. But more importantly is you need to make sure that employees are aware of that safety plan and that it's communicated and posted. Now, what about high-risk employees? Those ones that might be elderly or have immunocompromised systems and so forth. We're going to talk a little bit later about EOC and ADA, but they have released a list of people in high-risk categories. And what can you do or can't you do with regard to them? And how do you protect them? And how can you accommodate them? So we'll discuss that in a little bit. The next thing is that when you do recall employees to work, you want to notify your state unemployment agency. One, you're required to do that. and it's going to save on your taxes for those who choose not to return to work. So, excuse me. And then how to determine how those employees who are unable or unwilling to return to work, what do we do with those? So Lynn mentioned to me that a lot of the chamber members have the concern that people don't want to come back to work because they're getting a lot more money on unemployment, especially pandemic unemployment assistance. So that's where the extra $600 comes in through July 31st. And I'm not certain at this point if it's going to be extended or not extended. However, if you have somebody and you send that recall letter and you have indicated to them that you need to inform me by X date if you are not returning, your next step is to make sure you're sending then another acknowledgement letter that says, we sent you this, you've indicated you are not returning to work. So in effect, we are accepting your resignation. This is your last date of employment. This is the date your benefits end, because that's a 5-day letter that's required in New York State. So make sure you get that out within 5 days. I would always recommend sending it certified if you can, but regular mail, and if you can, email as well with a read receipt and a delivery receipt. And then you also want to, in that letter, indicate that their unemployment may be affected. Now, and then you notify unemployment, New York State unemployment. Why do you want to do that? Well, a couple reasons. One, right now, all the unemployment that you're getting through the state, that goes through the state, will go against you for experience rating. However, pandemic will not. So those benefits that they're receiving are not going to count against you. So if you notify the state unemployment that this person has chosen not to return to work or has now returned to work, you're not going to get hit with that experience rating. So you want to do that. And employees can continue to stay out for COVID-related reasons. So there's a whole slew under pandemic unemployment assistance, excuse me, that gives reasons why somebody could continue to stay out on unemployment, even if you have work available. So yes, typically you have to be ready and able to work. You've got a job for them, you're recalling them, but they can still stay out for COVID-related reasons. But there's a way for you not to be charged. So what do you do, though, if they don't want to come back? Is that okay? What do you do about rehiring people? What about PPP loan forgiveness? For example, right now, there have been guidelines that if you made a good faith effort to return them to work, and you can show that and document that, then those numbers will not be counted against you in terms of headcount for loan forgiveness. So that's another reason why you want to make sure you have a recall letter and the follow-up documentation acknowledging that they did or didn't return to work. Okay, so those are about recall. There's a lot to it. The other thing to keep in mind is that another way to get people back, of course, is how did you communicate with them when you were gone? Is there going to be hazard pay now? Is there not? And also keep in mind that there is a shared work program in many of the states, including New York, which allows employees to make more than they normally would under regular unemployment and allows you to bring them back up to 80% of the time and still get an unemployment benefit, including pandemic. So a lot of employers that have done that have found that employees are kind of getting the best of both worlds. They're considered employees, they're working, they're getting their benefits, getting all the rights, benefits, entitlement of being an employee, but they're still getting unemployment. And until July 31st, they're still getting pandemic benefits. So that's a win-win. And there's a great program in New York State under shared work that you can take advantage of. I know a lot of employers that have been, and it's working out very well. So that's basically right now for recall procedures. That's a big focus. Let's talk about workplace safety, because that's the next step. Some of this you're going to do in ahead of time, and some obviously you're going to be doing ongoing and regular. One of which is that determining what do you want to do with health screening procedures. You know, the EOC has determined, even though temperatures are an invasive procedure, under pandemic situations, it's okay to take employees' temperatures. You know, are you going to do that? When are you going to do that? Are you going to ask them to disclose if they're not feeling well? Do they have to sign off every day coming in? Are they coming through one area to get their temperatures taken? A lot of this is going to determine about what kind of business you are. Do you have a lot of forward facing? Do you have a lot of customers, high traffic areas? But keep in mind that any health screening procedures you do have to be kept confidential in terms of people's private health information. I did run into a situation where an employer was doing a healthcare company. And, it was required by Department of Health that they do temperatures, right? And as they were coming in, though, they were having a list. And every person coming in, so the people in front of them, did they have a temperature? Did they have a cough? Were they feeling well? You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're keeping it as confidential as possible. But you need to determine, what are you going to do for health screening procedures? Then you want to have an exposure response plan. What are you going to do? Are you going to isolate? If somebody's coming in where if they're not feeling well, they actually put an isolation room where they can go and discuss and determine, are they going home? Are they staying out? Are they staying in quarantine? Are we going to do contact tracing or tracking? What about staying at home? Is it okay for them to stay home if they're not feeling well? Are you going to relax your attendance rules given the situation so that people don't feel pressured to come to work? And what about if they have had somebody who tells you they're positive? How are you going to communicate to their other staff members? So those are all things that you do want to make sure that you're doing with an exposure response plan. All right, PPE. So yes, I know it's very difficult. I know the Chamber's got guideline vendors and available places to get PPE equipment, but you do have to provide personal protective equipment for your employees. That's under New York state law right now, and especially for forward facing, so where social distancing can happen. So you do want to have masks, gloves, if necessary, gowns. It all depends on your industry and the type of precautions that you can set up. Now, you have to provide this for employees. You cannot require them to bring their own. They can use their own, but you can't require them to bring their own. So a lot of times it's a matter of how are we getting them now? We're planning on opening. We're seeing, hopefully, knock on wood, we'll be back in phase 1 pretty soon. We're hoping for next 14 days, who knows? But as this is happening, start planning now on purchasing whatever you have to do, getting your own stockpiles up, determining what you need and how you need it, what the reorder points are.
Janet, can I just interrupt you on that for a second? Forgive me.
Sure.
I do want to let everybody know that the chamber, we are partnering with the county. So
Okay.
the county is able to obtain PPE, face shields, gloves, N95 masks, surgical masks, all the PPE at volume discount prices. So if you come through us, we will be ordering it directly through the county, and that information will be going out with our newsletters within the week. So I do want people to know that we have discount pricing on a lot of the PPE that will be available for the business community and the county. So I want to thank the county for that. And everybody, you can email me, you can email the chamber, and we'll get that information to you. So thank you, Janet.
Excellent. Yes, I know there's a lot more that's becoming available. And I know there's also some new loans and so forth for anybody who wants to start manufacturing or distributing PPE,
Yes.
from what I understand.
Yes.
Some new
And
things that are available.
Right, and we can help people with that also to get them through the ESD, because all of those applications are through Empire State Development. So we can assist you with that too, especially if you have if you already have a factory and you need to reconvert it to start manufacturing other types of items.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Janet.
Oh, you're welcome. So continuing with workplace safety, after PPE, the next thing is your cleaning procedures. Now, everybody knows that after you clean normally. But are you ramping it up? Who's doing it? How are they disinfecting? But also, what about just typical workplace guidelines where your workstation is? Cleaning the phones. There are people cleaning their pencils and their pens and their staplers and their mouse and all kinds of different things. You want to make sure that you have those cleaning procedures set up. What's the employee's responsibility to clean their workstation? What you're doing? What are you doing in terms of that exposure plan? What's going to be the guidelines for cleaning if somebody was positive and came into that area? So those are definitely things you want to have a plan for. And then, of course, physical distancing. And a lot of these tips and things for distancing and these workplace safety, OSHA has, CDC has, the Business Council have, EDC has, New York State Forward has. There's all different stuff out there. OSHA has available to you about workplace safety. But think about shifts, staggering shifts. Could you go to longer shifts? Could you do 6 or 7 day? Anything that you could do to improve distancing. Lunch and rest breaks. This is a really important one with regard to state and federal law. You still need to make sure that people are getting their meal breaks, whether or not they're telecommuting or whether or not they're in the workplace. And that means at least 30 minutes of uninterrupted time. So what are you going to do if you have a non-exempt hourly employee who you're going to close your break room so that you keep social distancing, but they're working at their work, they're taking their meal period at their workstation? You need to make sure that it's uninterrupted, or else you're going to be paying them for that time. So these are all things you want to keep in mind, that how you're going to take lunch breaks, where are you going to take them? Some businesses said that you can leave, the work site in order to take them. That's very frequent in manufacturing, that you need to stay on site, or if you have a place where you're the only employee. But is that still going to be the case? Is it going to be right now? Because you don't want people congregating. When you've got different things, can you rotate? Can you continue with a shared work program? Can you have people be 1 week on, 1 week off? Again, that comes back to that first thing about recall procedures and making a plan. What are you doing with phasing people in? Can you move a workstation so people are not so close? What about traffic patterns, bathrooms? All those patterns and things are things you want to think about now when you're starting, or plan for now as you're phasing in or thinking about returning to work. All right, let's talk a little bit more about some other things with workplace safety, because it's such a big area, obviously. Business travel. If you do have employees that travel for business, do they have to? Most conferences have been canceled or going to virtual, but there are ones that are already scheduled for the fall that have not been canceled yet. So are you going to continue allowing people to do that? What if you have salespeople that travel? Is there any restrictions on that? Is it based on geographic? These are all things you want to think about. What's essential, what's not? And of course, we have all the government restrictions with regard to public transportation and the airlines and so forth. So you want to follow, obviously, those government guidelines. Then what if you have a business that you have customers or visitors coming in? What are those protocols? Do your employees know what those protocols are going to be? You need to educate them and communicate to them. Do customers come in the same way that they used to? Are they allowed to come into the workplace? How many can come in? I'm sure we've all seen right now some of the essential retails, the Walmarts and the Home Depots, the grocery stores. There's a limited number of people who can come in. And when they are waiting to come in, they're at distancing, with tapes and things like that on the floor. Are you going to be doing that? Can you use video telephone conferencing versus in-person client meetings? What about shaking of hands? Tell your employees now, it's okay not to greet a customer or a client with a handshake. I've heard and read some things right now that said handshakes are a thing of the past. You're not going to be having that anymore. It's going to be so acceptable business practice not to shake somebody's hand. So those are all things you want to plan for and communicate for the safety of your workers. And then, of course, OSHA, there's a lot of guidelines with OSHA. There's regs in there with regard to what positions are higher potential for exposure. Do you have to record that? There's all sort of safety guidelines under workers' comp and OSHA. Under your general liability, you still have that general duty clause to keep your employees safe. So make sure that you're familiar with all those OSHA and workers' comp guidelines as well. And they are still coming out. There's a lot of changes with regard to the exposures. Is it can it be proven chain of causation with regard to exposure? With somebody getting COVID with return to work. So keep that kind of looking at it coming down the pike, because there's a lot more guidance coming forward on that.
Excuse me, Janet, I have a question for you. This doesn't there's a question that came through. It's not specific to employees. It's specific to customers. Will because this is will we be able to take the temps of people, not employees, coming in with no contact thermometers?
From what I understand, again, I'm more the employee expert, not that one, but yes, from what I understand, you can take customers' temperatures. Customers may not like it, but they choose to stay in your business or not. I would say if you're going to do something like that, you should probably have something posted so that they're aware of it, and I mean, most people are being very agreeable and cooperative because they understand, with the mask, with everything, just like a business has a right to not serve somebody who's not wearing a mask.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, you can't come in the store. You can't, take this food or something. You can take temperatures. Definitely as an employee, you're allowed to do it. So I think the same thing applies for certain.
I would think so, because I know when if I go around the county, I see the signs, masks required, no mask, no service.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was something similar, probably just put on the door, masks required, temperature will be taken upon entry or something as a warning.
Exactly. The only thing is that you have to remember is not everybody shows a fever. In fact, a lot of people don't have a temperature. I've been seeing businesses that are essential businesses staying open, that most of the time, especially in the morning and early shifts, people's temperatures are much lower because until recently it's been cold. So they're coming into work that, when you're first walking in the door, you don't have a temperature. And that's something to, keep in mind, is that you can be positive or you can still have COVID and not have a temperature. So you have to make that decision as to, is it necessary? Is it not necessary? With employees and with customers.
Well, it's a tool. It's like a lot of everything else that we're dealing with, that we're working with. It's a tool. It's one tool in the toolbox. It's not the end all be all, because like you said, some people will be showing temperatures. Some people will not be showing temperatures.
Exactly.
We wear the masks, not really to protect us, but to protect the other people.
Exactly.
And that's a whole separate issue, because I'm always surprised at how people do not want to wear masks. But just then another question, and this has to do with the employee. So now, if somebody has a medical exemption, somebody has a medical issue with a mask, and they can't breathe with it, but they're an essential employee. How does that work? They can't wear a mask. They have asthma. They have a respiratory problem.
And we're going to go over that a little bit more further when I cover ADA and human rights. But I will say something now. You have a duty to have a discussion with them. It's called an interactive dialogue. You have to accommodate that, because there are people that can't wear a mask. Maybe they have asthma. Maybe they have COPD. Maybe they've got facial hair for a religious reason, and they can't have a problem with wearing a mask. So you have to have an interactive discussion. Can I accommodate that? Can they be in an area that's non-forward facing? Can they work from home? Do they need to take a leave? Do they need to stay on unemployment? There's all kinds of things, but you do have to have a discussion. You can't say you must or else, because then you open yourself up to liability.
Sure, of course.
So you do have a duty, and that could happen very easily. It's not just about comfort. It's about, why can't you? And you have a right to ask for documentation or some information if it's a medical condition, or if it's a religious accommodation of why they can't wear a mask.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to ask a question for you.
No, we're going to go into it a little further, but absolutely.
Okay, continue.
Oh, great. All right. So now we got through safety. We got through recall. Let's talk about employee benefits. There's been a lot of changes with benefits. One, if you terminated employees, basically laid them off, and now you're trying to rehire them, or did you furlough and keep your benefits, or did you furlough and not keep your benefits? A lot of that is going to determine about what your policy is with your group health insurance. Do they have a new waiting period if you terminated them? What's your policy say? If they're rehired within a certain period of time, can they get right back on it? Or is there up to the 90-day waiting period? What is their reinstatement rights? What if they weren't paying premiums when you were out, their portion of it? Are you going to ask for that back? And how are you going to ask for that back? Is it going to be through payroll, or is it going to be separate? There's been a lot of changes with COBRA for people that maybe had benefits, but now aren't going to qualify because they're not working the requisite number of hours. A lot of the carriers have relaxed guidelines for, if somebody's not working the requisite number of hours under ACA, which is 30 per week. As long as the premiums are being paid, they're relaxing, but that's according to carrier. And I would encourage you to check with your broker like Rose and Kiernan to determine. They're my go-to people when I have employee health insurance questions and benefit questions. But for certain, there's been changes. There's changes in COBRA with regard to the notice period, how much notice people have to decide. The marketplace, New York State marketplace, has been reopened for open enrollment. So there's a lot of differences with qualifying events. There's a lot of relaxation with health insurance benefits. Now there's allowing for a mid-year open enrollment. So if you need to make changes to your benefit plans, now's the time that you're allowed to do that mid-plan year, which is not usual. Typically, you have to wait for your plan year. So I encourage you to check with your brokers, check with your carriers, and make sure that you are maintaining your insurances correctly and making sure that employees are aware of their rights under this insurance. So, regardless of what happened, if you laid somebody off or you furloughed them and did not continue your benefits, you should have sent COBRA notices. That's very important to do. And if you didn't, you need to get in contact with your carrier, your broker, and determine what you're going to do about it. So that's mid-year enrollments. Now, there's other changes with health insurance, health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts. For those of you who have FSAs, the dependent care assistance is now allowing you to, typically, FSAs or Section 125s pre-tax. You can't make any changes to an FSA, whether it be a health FSA or a dependent care FSA. You are now allowed to do so. You can make a mid-year change without a qualifying event. That's a great advantage. So somebody who has suddenly had their pay reduced or their benefits reduced, previous to this would have been locked in for an FSA to whatever they committed to for the year. Now they're actually allowed to make a reduction or an increase. There are some people that are actually going to increase as well. The other issue is that, and this is a small little thing in the CARES Act, FSAs are now allowed to be used for over-the-counter drugs without a prescription. Typically, it changed, I want to say 16, 14. Rob might be able to answer this one, but FSAs did become where you could not buy over-the-counter drugs on a pre-tax basis. And it was unless you had a prescription. For example, if you had a Prilosec and the doctor gave you a script, you could get that on a pre-tax and use it for FSA. Now it's opened it back up through this year. That's a great way for people to be using their FSA money and not lose it by using it for over-the-counter drugs. And there's a whole list of them. Rose and Kieran actually has some great materials that I will make sure Lynn gets to put up on the site. So that's great. Yeah, and there's also a new change with the rollover limits have increased. Typically, it's only $500. Now it's $550. So, there's a lot of different changes to FSAs. HSAs as well can be used for over-the-counter medical products, which typically they never were before. So some other issues with employee benefits I want to talk about is your 401k, other pension plans. There's definitely, what if somebody comes back? Was there a new waiting period? Can they get back on again? There's changes with regard to hardships, loans. There's extensions to the loans. You don't have a hardship withdrawal, that 10% penalty if you're taking it out because of COVID or withdrawal due to COVID, which is wonderful. So these are all different types of issues with the 401k that you have to worry about. Was there a break in service? How does that affect a match? Was the match paused? Right now, there's a lot of companies that can't do it anymore, and with all of those, I'm skipping one, but SPD, anytime you have a change in your FSA, your 401k, your pension, you have to change your summary plan descriptions. You have to have an amendment, and those amendments have to get communicated to employees. So very, very important to make sure that you work again with any third-party administrator that you have with regard to these, so that you are getting your amendments done, that you're making employees aware of all these good things that are being extended for them under this pandemic. Paid leave is another benefit to take a look at. As we just discussed, for some people, paid leave may be an option with regard to an accommodation. So keep in mind, when employees come back, the Federal Families First Corona Response Act, FFCRA, which includes federal emergency sick leave and expanded FMLA, are still in play into the end of December. So somebody who comes back to work that you recall can now turn around and say to you, all right, I need 10 weeks off to stay home because my child is home from school, and you are paying them 2/3, up to $200 a day to do so. And these all coordinate with maybe other reasons if you're in the FMLA or with disability, with paid family leave. There's a lot of coordination of benefits and leave that apply even when they returned to work. So these are very complicated. It's not one size fits all. Every situation is different depending on the type of company you are, the size of your company, how much leave. Is it under New York State? Is it under federal? Again, there's so many different scenarios, but don't forget that you have an obligation to make sure that people are getting leave if they're entitled to it. And you as an employer have an affirmative duty to make them aware of what that leave is. So that's a lot, but there's so many with benefits. Oh, forgot to mention one other great thing with the CARES Act that came up that people may not be aware of is that typically tuition reimbursement programs that employers may have, and keep in mind there's a lot of employers that are working and have a lot of business going on, a lot of essential. They typically can provide tuition assistance benefits up to $5,052.50 per year, and that's a tax-free benefit to an employee, and it's a tax-deductible expense to the employer. Well, the CARES Act extended that to student loan repayment. So you can actually, as a benefit to your employees, pay back student loans through this year up to that $5,250 as a benefit to your employees and take it as a tax-deductible expense. So that's a new benefit under the CARES Act as well to keep in mind. So that's a lot on benefits, I know.
Do you have a moment for a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so this actually goes back to when we were when you were mentioning about asking the employee for documentation for medical questions. So the question is, I thought asking an employee for documentation was against the HIPAA law.
No, not at all. There are guidelines under the EOC and ADA that make invasive medical, like taking a temperature, but those are released under pandemic. But absolutely, you have a right to ask when there's an accommodation or to substantiate an FMLA leave or disability, to ask for documentation. Just keep in mind, one, that it's got to be still, you've got to respect the rights of your employees with regard to their private health information. Not everybody is subject to knowing. So even if you have a management team, it's really a need to know basis. So, and that same thing goes with you. We talked about exposure plans. If you have an employee in your workplace that's positive, you should not be announcing who it is. Should be a coworker, has been. I mean, sometimes it's very obvious, but you're right. There are private health information laws. So, but you as an employer can ask for documentation to substantiate any accommodation requests or any leave requests that's medically related.
So if somebody comes in and they are positive, we don't say anything. But what if that person says something and then one of their coworkers says, hey, John told me that he was positive. I'm not coming back to work. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm going home. So how do you deal with that?
Well, John can say anything he wants. It's his body and his right to say it. The coworker really should not be spreading that around. But what you need to do is determine CDC has new guidelines with regard to exposure. So there is a possibility that coworker goes out on a quarantine. And if that's the case, as of up to December 31st, you still have got payment that you have to make them under federal emergency sick leave, under New York State paid sick leave, and so forth. But what you want to discourage is the wildfire type of effect that it has. And just because John disclosed it does not mean it's okay for everybody else to discuss. That's important.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any other questions on bennies and whatever we've discussed so far? All right. So let's talk about compensation, because that's a big one. Wage and hour law has got a lot of liability there. And, when people are out right now and working from home, it's very important for remote workers, especially those who are non-exempt, to be tracking their time appropriately. We talked about a meal period, but they should still be tracking when they started work, when they're taking their meal period, when they're ending work. You still have the same requirements under wage and hour law, and you're still liable for those laws. So it's important, to make sure that any remote workers are being tracked and paid appropriately. So now, what about when people are coming back where you were closed and now you're reopening and returning to work? A lot of people do merit increases once a year, cost of living increases. Were you on that cycle? Did you miss that cycle? Are you going to continue with that? Or are you not? It depends on what financially you can do. But if not, and if you are going to, are they going to be retroactive? Are they going to be going forward? You need to make sure that, you're addressing that and communicating that to employees, because employees are going to want to know that. Did you do pay cuts? And if you did, are you going to bring them, now they're back to work, are you bringing them back up? Are you phasing that in? There's guidelines with regard to exempt employees. You cannot reduce an exempt employee's salary because of the quantity or quality of work. Could you, because you are making adjustments overall to compensation? Yes, you can. However, you have to make sure that you keep in your salary basis. There's a state salary basis, which is 75 times minimum wage, and that's the weekly minimum that somebody who's exempt has to get paid. So even if you've cut somebody down, an exempt person down to 3 days a week, you still have to pay that salary basis in New York of $46,020. Can't go below that, or they're not exempt. You negate your exemption. So these are all things, again, you want to keep in mind if you're looking at salary reductions. And of course, with an hourly employee, non-exempt employee, you want to make sure you don't go ever below minimum wage. And remember, if you do make any changes, especially lowering somebody's salary, you have to do a pay rate notice under the Wage Theft Prevention Act. So that's very important to make sure that you're doing the documentation that you need to do. But can you implement pay cuts? Absolutely. Just make sure you're giving notice, 7 days notice. Make sure you're doing the pay rate notices. But think about, if you took them before, are you bringing them back up? Are they staying where they were at? Are you phasing it back in? Those are all decisions that you have to make with regard to compensation. If you change somebody from exempt to non-exempt, are they going back to exempt if they qualify as exempt? What about status? Are you changing full-time, part-time, hours? All of those things are stuff you need to decide about. What about bonuses? Are they going to be still in effect? Are they not? And again, communicate that to employees. And is there hazard pay going to be, did they have hazard pay before? Are you going to continue it? As we're doing phase one and you're more, knock on wood, that we're moving out of this, are you going to continue that hazard pay or not? So those are all areas that are important to keep in mind with compensation. All right, now let's talk about remote work. guidelines are, we're now in a situation where so much technology has changed. We're doing a lot of work remotely. We're doing a lot of meetings remotely. The state and guidelines have said where somebody can continue to be remote, you should allow them, whether it be essential and non-essential business. If you can, you should, because it's going to help with, again, exposures and perpetuating that potential for somebody to be exposed to COVID. So, is that possible to do? A lot of times when it comes to Division of Human Rights or Americans with Disabilities Act, one thing you have to look at is when somebody asks about, can I do this, is not why you can't, but how can you? So is it possible? Are you just saying, yes, you've got to return to work because now we're going to be open, or could somebody actually stay home? Are you going to stagger it? Are you going to do 3 days a week at home, 2 days a week in the office? Who can stay? Is it only part-time? Is it going to be alternate days? And then what if somebody has a request to work from home? Is that going to be short-term? Is it going to be long-term? Is that even possible? And you may find that you have cost savings in order to do that with remote work. And of course, your technology. Keep in mind, remote work right now, I don't know if everybody's aware of it or not, but workers' comp, the New York State Insurance Rating Board has actually given a new workers' comp classification to people who are either remote workers or people who you might be paying that are idle, that actually are not returned or furloughed people. And what it does is it reduces a classification code to similar to a clerical worker. So you've got a good chunk of time where, you might be able to, as somebody's remote, may be able to get reclassified with a code, workers' comp code, and in essence, save you some money in the long run. So remote work not only could be practical, but it also may be an accommodation. So those are all things you need to take a look at. And again, it can be on an individual basis. But what's very important is not to do it because you feel that somebody has to stay home or must be back in the workplace. Every situation, case by case basis. And you need to discuss it on its own merits and look at it as a possible accommodation. So I think we've all been pleasantly surprised about remote work and how, actually how much it can work when it needs to. So, all right. Communications. We've been talking a lot about communications, but basically is you need to make sure your employees are aware of what's going on. The more communication, the better. Hopefully you had this when somebody went out and now when they're coming back. So, what about these policies? What about the changes with regard to, what if they're homesick? Physical distancing policies. Do you need training on the new workplace safety, and those protocols? Communications, our employees returning to work have to go through a new orientation because you have these new disinfecting or reporting to work policies. What if you do have an exposure? Do you have a written plan that's communicated? What if you have an exposure at your workplace or an employee who is, claiming that they've been exposed? How are you going to deal with the media? Who's going to deal with the media? And also making sure your required postings are visible and apparent. Your work safety plan, your FFCRA, poster has to be up. So the more things you have back. There's also been some changes with regard to your voting law. So now voting's coming back again in New York State. It changed from 2 hours to 3 hours. It's back to 2 hours. So now if we're going to have remote voting, you still got to post that. You still have to make sure that any labor law posters that have changed have been up and posted. So all those things should be visible and apparent, whether it be on an intranet, whether it be on your payroll site. It does have to be in your physical workplace as well, workspace. But those communications, whether it be to employees or customers, are very important to make sure you have a plan for those. And speaking of communication and paperwork, let's talk about new hire paperwork. A lot of this is going to depend on, was somebody terminated or were they just put on inactive status? They're inactive status, unless if you've changed their compensation or they don't have benefits, basically can just probably change their status in payroll and get them going again. But if you've changed their hours, their pay, if they were terminated and back, you do need to do new hire paperwork. You need to make sure that they have the new W-4. You know, they can't just implement. If somebody was terminated and comes back, you got to make sure that they get the 2020 W-4, not just put in, oh, I used to have married 0. Doesn't work anymore. Got to do the new one. So you definitely may want to have new hire paperwork. There's nothing to say there's harm having everybody redo it when they come back. There's not. But it's not absolutely necessary unless they were terminated, then you do have to have somebody back. Do you have new orientation? Do you have to do new hire reporting to the state? You do want, as we discussed, notify the unemployment agencies so that they have a record that this person did return to work. That helps cut back on fraud. It helps cut back on your experience rating. And then there's I-9 issues. For those of you who do have the pleasure of doing an I-9, there have been some changes with regard to getting verification on documentation, where it was okay to do it via video or remote before. So when these people have now come back, if you've hired somebody or rehiring somebody, you have to take a look at, is documentation expired? Do you need to see their documentation? Do you, if they were rehired, there's an actual section on the I-9, and there's a new I-9, by the way, new I-9 form going forward right now for COVID. There's a rehire section. You do have to do all these. Don't just use the old one. You have to either, if you have a new I-9, or you have to do the rehire section of the previous I-9. So these are very important to make sure, because all of these are subject to audit. And every single one of those is subject to a fine if you do not do it correctly. So please keep that in mind. New hire paperwork is just as important. All right. So let's talk about policy changes. Can you change your policies? Yes, you can. You know, what are you going to do about PTO time? Did employees use their PTO time? Did you allow it to accrue if they were furloughed? You know, essential workers. I was thinking to myself, you know, these nurses and doctors and people, you know, phlebotomists, and everybody's been working so many different hours. You know, now that perhaps things are going, you know, coming downward, they're all going to want to take time off. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to allow that? Are you going to stagger it? Is there going to be a blackout period? What about now businesses returning that people had PTO banks available to them? And now finally you're getting back open. You know, I'm thinking myself, I don't know about all of you, but, you know, this hair is going crazy here. Nail salons, hair salons are going to be very busy. What if somebody wants to take time off? Are you going to allow that when now they're at the height of coming back? So these are all policy changes. You want to make sure you're either adjusting now and communicating. And can you? Yes, you can. There's just guidelines, of course. Attendance policies, are you going to relax those because you want people to stay home if they're not feeling well? Time off requests, flexible scheduling options. These are all type of policy changes. Do you have a policy about remote work? Do you have a telecommunications policy? Do you have a pandemic policy? These are all things that you need to take a look at your current ones and determine whether or not they were changed. I've had a lot of clients and a lot of questions when people were furloughed, and I said to them, well, did you require them to use their PTO time before you furloughed them? I don't know. I said, well, what does your policy say? I don't have a policy. So now's the time to take a look at what did you encounter when you laid off or you had to furlough employees? What issues came up that you don't want to come up again next time? God forbid there is a next time. So take a look at what policies might need changes. The biggest thing, though, is determining what is or is not an earned benefit according to law. And secondly, making sure that employees have constructive receipt of these policy changes. You want to make sure you're making them aware of what these changes are. So that's a pretty big one. Other policy changes to talk about. Meal and rest breaks. Are we going to stagger them? Are we going to not allow them to take them together? There are companies that everybody takes a lunch from 12 to 1. Well, that's going to change, right? So now perhaps take a look at your handbooks. Do those all have to get changed? Your travel policies. might need changes. Your telecommuting policies, your IT policies, especially if more telework, do you need to make changes about security? All those things are now time to look at the policies. People are coming back to work and making sure they're communicated. Okay. So next thing we're going to talk about is business continuity. And there's a lot out there, again, a lot of resources for you, but now's the time. It's almost like when you have a tsunami or hurricane or whatever, what do you do about business continuity? How do you pay people? Can you telework? What are the systems set up? A lot of people were caught unawares. So now's the time to make sure that you've discussed your with your carriers with liability insurances with regard to business interruptions, all those type of things. Who's doing what positions are necessary, what positions can work from home. These are all continuity things that, we've unfortunately had to scramble to find. And some people, was easier than others. They may have been used to it. So now's the time to take a look at, do you need to make adjustments to those business continuity plans? And what exactly it is, because again, you don't know what's going to happen down the road. All right. Let's talk about unions for those of you who are unionized. So, do you have a collective bargaining agreement? Is it up? Is there mandatory subjects that now have to get changed? So we talked about bringing people back, affecting changing if benefits are going to change, time off is going to change. Are there salary reductions? Do they have to be bargained? Think about adding a force majeure clause into your CBA next time, so that if there's something out of control, you have a little bit more control over it. Look at your no strike clauses about continued work. Also, is there any obligations? There's a Section 502 of the National Labor Relations Act that discuss hazard pay. Is that a requirement? Is it not? So these are things that if you do have a union, you do want to make sure that you're keeping track of or addressing. So hopefully that's not too bad for everybody. So there's a couple additional compliance issues I want to talk about. One is we touched upon this a little bit. The EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, on the Americans with Disabilities Act, does have guidelines for people who have serious medical conditions. There's a lot of them. There's, it could be asthma, it could be obesity, it could be COPD, it could be their age, it could be kidney disease. There's a whole list of those. ADA applies if you have 20 or more employees. But New York State Division of Human Rights has a lot of the same requirements, and that applies for one employee. So you still have to have an interactive dialogue that you have to document if there's an issue. So what if I have a serious medical condition and I want to come back to work, but you don't want me to come back to work because you're worried about that, that could be dangerous for me. Can you tell me no? You can, but you have to be very, very careful, because the EOC does say if you present a direct threat to yourself or to others, you can say, no, you can't work, but they do require you to go through a whole dialogue about accommodating, which includes working from home, which includes putting them into a more safe position, which includes PPE. So don't automatically make the assumption, sorry, you're 70, you're not coming back. I don't want to take that risk. You have to have that discussion. Now, if they don't want to come back, it's the same thing. You need to have that and talk about the discussion as to can they, can't they, is that an accommodation? But don't make automatic decisions that a class of people or certain employees should or should not be returning to work. You have to have that discussion. So that's, I can't stress enough those guidelines, because they are out there. If you go to the EEOC site, they have a great frequently asked question. There's about 60 questions on it. Really outlines your responsibilities for having these discussions and what the employee's rights are and what your rights to maintain a safe workplace. That's under OSHA's general duty clause. That's under the EEOC's hazard clause. There's a whole bunch of protections for on both sides. Division of Human Rights, as I mentioned, one employee. Right now, there's a ton of whistleblower protections out there. Division of Human Rights just came out with a whole big thing about retaliation. If you're being discriminated against based on COVID, and it's really geared a lot to race and ethnicity, especially with regard to the Asian population. But there are whistleblower protections. There are retaliation protections if you feel that you're being discriminated against. Department of Health has them. OSHA has them. So you need to be careful that all of these federal and state laws pertaining to discrimination, pertaining to employees' rights are being followed. Right now, I just read recently that there's some, law firm in Florida that is, going out there and saying to employees, have you not been treated well? Let's sue. And they're going to start seeing that. I mean, we've already seen Walmart beginning sued. There's a lot of already, I've been seeing coming through the courts, already lawsuits on how employers have been treating employees during this. And is it or is it not discriminatory behavior? So keep in mind that there's a lot going on right now. The other thing is WARN, which has to do with mass layoffs and has to do with closures. So there's federal WARN, there's state WARNs, and different states have different ones. Typically, you have to have at least 50 employees. But what you have to have done is you had to give a notice if you think you're going to have that. But a lot of times what's happening is that you think you're bringing employees back and going to recall them, but then you find out that your business can't stay open. So if you are going to be a closing, or you are going to be, there's certain percentages and numbers, and there's certain guidelines on it. Then you have obligations and responsibilities under federal and state WARN Act, and of notice, not just to employees, but to a lot of governmental agencies as well. Another thing of compliance I want to go over is the PPP and the loan forgiveness. We talked a little bit about that with regard to how to protect yourself if employees do not want to come back to work. So we talked earlier before about you want to make sure that you're having something in writing that you recalled them and they've chosen not to return, because that's going to help you with your PPP loan forgiveness if you did have one of those. And then the last thing I just wanted to talk about with your compliance issues is your Families First Corona Response Act. Keep in mind, all those guidelines are still in place. Same thing right now. The governor extended the stay at home until, was it June 18th now? So because of that, so is your New York State paid sick leave, the emergency paid sick leave, the one that covers up to 14 days or 5 days, the one that has additional paid family leave and disability benefits. Those are still in play right now. And FFCRA is through the end of the year. So you've got rights that the employee has rights that you have to make sure you do. So say, for example, somebody's been out on expanded FMLA for 2/3 for 10 weeks because the school's closed, right, through the end of June. Well, when school is now over, which is usually up to elementary and high schoolers through the end of June, so typically you'd want them back. But now if they turn around and say, well, my daycare's closed, I can't come back because of that, you need to make sure you're getting new paperwork so that you're protecting yourselves as well. And they have a duty to give that to you so that they can take advantage. And another reason you want that is because you want to be able to get your tax credit. So you want to make sure that you're identifying appropriately why somebody's out on extended leave and have the documentation to support that for yourself. So I've been talking for an hour, and I know we've gone over a lot of things. I've gone very quickly over a lot of it. There's so much. A lot of it depends on your business, your type of business. Have you been open? Have you been completely closed? Are people furloughed? Are they terminated? How are you bringing them back? So, I just want to put out there that if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Any supporting documentation I can give you, I'm very willing to do. So, Lynn, did we have any other questions from anybody?
The only other question I have is, the questions that I have are somewhat involved. How would I get a hold of you?
Oh, well, you can do Giannetta at visionshr.com. The 845-549-0062 is my cell phone. I'm giving it out there because I am working from home. The office number is 845-567-3978, which will get forwarded to my cell phone, but I don't mind people calling me on it. And, again, there's so much that's very specific to you and your business that not everything, there's not one answer fits all in this situation whatsoever. But please keep in mind that as an employer and as a business, I want you to minimize your risk and your liability, and understanding that all of the federal and state employment laws did not go away. And as we start getting back to normal, you're going to find that, how you treated your employees before is going to dictate what's going to happen going forward. And if I can help in any way, please let me know.
I think it's important. That's important, Janet, because, HR has always been really confusing anyway for a lot of people, because there's federal and there's state, and we are in New York State, so we have a lot more overlays than, say, Arkansas or Louisiana. And now with this situation, there's even more complications, and without a clear understanding of all of the basics, the foundation, with all of these overlays and all of these other situations which change by the day. It's very important. Yeah, it's very important to know what goes on. So again, and if anybody has any questions, you need to get a hold of Janet. You can go through us. You can contact us at the chamber at info@orangeny.com, or lynnc@orangeny.com, or on Facebook, of course, we'll answer you, or you can just contact Janet directly. And Janet, I can't thank you enough. We did go over a little time, but I do appreciate your time. You're a huge resource for us, and a huge resource for Orange County and the entire Hudson Valley. And this is a very, very difficult time for employers. So thank you very much for taking the time to spend this morning with us. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And thank you to the Chamber for everything that you've been doing for our businesses. It's been wonderful. Excellent resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. And for those of you who are out in Facebook land, you can go on our website at www.orangeny.com, and you can click on the COVID resources page. We are now having when you go to that, there's a whole section about reopening. So all of the ESD guidance that comes down almost on a daily basis. If you're not receiving our newsletters, you can get it there. If you do want to receive our newsletter and you want to be on, we send out 3 a week. If you do want to receive that, and that has all of the updates that go on, and if there's something really drastically important, we send out a special one. But please maintain, your contact with us. We look forward to working together. Even if we aren't able to handshake for a while, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody's faces. So please be safe. Make sure social distance, wear your mask out there. It's really, really important. We would like to reopen, and all of those opportunities to reopen are directly tied to the metrics, which have to do with hospitalizations and deaths. So please keep yourself, your employees, and everybody you care about safe. And have a great rest of the day on this day. So thanks, Janet.
Bye-bye,
everybody.
Bye.